MNN social group where we advertise some of these. How many of you are in the neighborhood? Okay. Cool. Well, we want to make sure more and more parents come. It's interesting every time different parents come, right? The same parents who attended the last one, some of them don't show up, so it's okay. Okay, so over to Brother Wazir. You guys
okay.
Start. And they have the handout, so you...
Perfect.
In case you're interested.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum everybody. Thank you for coming. And I appreciate you being here. Just as a quick introduction to myself, if you don't know who I am, I'm Omar Zia. I'm the principal at the Woodland School, which is a grade 7 to grade 12 school in Mississauga. And I've been in education for about 24 years. And before getting into administration, I was a guidance counselor for about 10 years. So that's important for you to know where I'm coming from, so you understand the lens through which I'm speaking today. But I'm also a parent, and I've gotten parented 2 daughters, and I've got 5 nephews who are all under the age of 13. Youngest is 8 months now. So a lot of interactions, so I'm also sharing that information with you as well. My youngest brother is 11 years younger than me and was actually in my grade 9 science class when I was teaching. So just to give you an idea of kind of where I'm coming from and the lens through which I'm speaking, so that you can understand when I'm speaking about these strategies, everything I'm sharing with you is something I've tried. Right, so I've gone through a lot of different books, a lot of research, different practical experiences in school and at home, so that what I share with you is something I know works. Right? It works in multiple areas, not just in Mississauga schools, but also in Brampton schools, because I've taught in both cities over the past few years. My email address is on here and also on your worksheet, so at any time if you would like to reach out with specific questions for your families, for your own children, or any other general questions you may have about the education system, I'm more than happy to entertain any questions. And sometimes people want to get on a phone call or on a Zoom call. I'm more than happy to do that to support and to assist you, inshallah. Okay. So what we're doing today, we're going to spend just a few moments talking about why this topic of communication, why it's so important, and to understand what we call competition. And we'll go through teachable moments and then specific communication strategies. So let me ask this question. Why is communication so important? The topic of the workshop is communication, so why is it so important? Can't get anything done unless you can communicate. Let's go a bit deeper than that. Why is communication so important? To understand what's happening? Okay, let's go a bit deeper than that. If there was no communication, what would happen? Chaos. What else may happen? Can you imagine a baby who can't cry to communicate when they're hungry or need a diaper change? What would happen to the baby? Frustration, right, can grow. Oftentimes we think about the treacherous 3s, right, or the terrible 2s when kids are just starting to communicate and having difficulty and having frustration during that time period, right? So communication is very important. When we talk about our home environment, why is communication so important? What does it give us? Gives us peace. Okay. What else might give us? Think about your workplaces or schools. Mutual understanding. Okay. Structure. Collaboration. Okay. Going on. Let's go be a little bit more above collaboration. What else can it give us? So to increase work, maybe our workability, to create happiness, satisfaction in our environment. Achieving common goals. Okay. Productivity. Okay. We have phones, we have email, we have how many apps that help us with communication, how many different types of emails that we have. Some of us Hotmail, Gmail, snail mail, all sorts of mail we have. We have all of these tools to communicate, but what's the basic level? All of these things we're speaking about, what is the purpose of communication? That's a great summary, mashallah. It's also to express, right? To express our emotions, to express our feelings, to express to each other how we feel, like you mentioned, happiness, right? So we have this exchange of our expressions, which we take time to understand. What's the fundamental reason why parents need to communicate with their kids? Okay, so it's not just one-way communication, but we have two-way communication. Okay. What's the fundamental reason we want to communicate with our kids? Understand their needs and pains, okay? Child comes to you and says, I hurt myself, I fell off my bike and now I have a scrape on my knee. What do you do?
We'll apply medicine, we'll soothe him down.
Okay. So apply medicine, soothe the child down. Okay. Child comes home and says, I got 50% of my math test. What are we going to do? Sit down and talk with them. And when we talk to them, what are we doing with them?
So we'll offer help.
Offer help. Empathize. Next time they have a test, what are we going to do with them? Help them. When we're helping our kids study for a test, what are we doing? Encouraging. What else are we doing? The most fundamental role of a teacher, of a parent. I just gave it away. Be successful. Teaching them. Thank you. Teaching. So as parents, the fundamental reason we communicate is because we're teaching our kids. Everything from when they first start to cry when they're born, to teaching them how to speak, how to communicate, when they need something, when they have some needs that they want. I experienced this when I was young too, when my kids were young, using sign language with them, right? As early as 6 months, you can start teaching your kids sign language so they can actually learn how to communicate. Reduce some of that frustration that someone had mentioned, right? So teaching our children, this is the fundamental reason why we communicate. So as parents, really, we are our children's first teacher, right? So I realize none of you were here in the first workshop I did in September, but the purpose of that workshop was all about how do we help our kids at school, and the role of the parent is that we are the first educator of our kids. And so communication is the tool that we use when we teach kids. Right? So as a teacher in the classroom, we're constantly communicating with kids. As an administrator, as a guidance counselor, constantly communicating with kids so they can learn, and so we can teach them so they can learn everything about themselves and how they can conduct themselves in the environment which they reside in or live. But sometimes when our kids grow up, so how many people here have teenagers at home? Okay, so then I think this probably makes a lot more sense to you, right? Sometimes when kids grow up, all of a sudden they are like aliens. It's like they've completely changed. And when they're younger, we're able to communicate with them and tell them something and teach it to them directly, and they would just accept it at face value. A very simple example, smoking is haram. Okay, it's haram. They don't question it. You might have a quick conversation about why it's haram, but otherwise they kind of get it. But when they become a teenager and you tell them smoking is haram, what do you get? You get an argument. Uncle so-and-so has been smoking 3 packs a day for the last 50 years. He's still alive. They use some strange examples like that. Why is marijuana haram? It's halal in Canada, right? There's CBD, it's medicinal, it helps you. How could you dare say it's haram, right? The why questions start coming up, and this is where it becomes a frustration. So before we move forward, we have to understand, why does that actually happen? Some of you if you have a background in psychology or taking Psych 101 at university, you might recognize this diagram. And what it represents is that when children are between the ages of 0 and 6, they follow a logical sequence of events. That's how they communicate, that's how they learn. Everything has to follow a sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 4, 6, 5? No, something's wrong. Logically, the brain can actually start to understand something. You have to follow a specific sequence. Here's a simpler example. Time for bed. Brush your teeth. So do a washroom, brush your teeth, change your clothes, make dua, sleep, right? But let's say, for example, it's a late night, you're out somewhere, someone's home, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, you come home, you're just tired, you just want the kids to go to sleep. Just forget brushing your teeth, don't worry about changing your clothes, just get to sleep. What you gonna get? No, right? You're gonna get a temper tantrum, right? Temper tantrums occur when you don't follow a logical sequence. So in my experience, I was also, before getting involved in guidance, a part of my guidance role was also being involved in special education. And within special education, we have a group of kids called developmentally delayed, DD. These are kids who are teenaged in terms of their age, like they're 15, 16, 17 years old, but cognitively, they're about 6 months to a year old, right? So they're developmentally delayed. Some of them have autism as well. Otherwise, just a developmental delay. Their brain just didn't develop after a certain age, right? So some of them can't speak. Some of them are semi-verbal. Some can't even move. Some can actually move, right? So we have a number of classrooms like that across Peel. My current school has 2 classrooms like that. So we have a kid, Abdul Malik is his name, and he has a temper tantrum every time we don't follow the sequence that happened on the first day of school. So the first day of school, September 6th, he came in, And we took him to what we call the calming room, just to show it to him, like we did with all the kids. But for him, every morning, if he doesn't go there when he first arrives at school, temper tantrum, right? So he has to have that visit. It's like a logical sequencing of events that has to happen. That's ages 0 to 6. Then we move from ages 7 to about, let's say, 12, 13, right? So about grade 2 to about grade 6, 7. In that situation, you have what they call inductive reasoner. It means that the child can think, but they allow themselves to be induced. They allow themselves to be taught directly, explicitly. It's difficult for them to understand implicit. Everything has to be very concrete. Everything has to be something they can actually see or experience, right? Abstract thinking is very difficult for kids at this age, right? So everything's got to be something that they can see, something they can touch, something they can actually experience and learn through that experience. So you'll find that in elementary school, most of the way lessons are taught is through experiential learning, right? A lot of discussion-based. You'll find in elementary classrooms, teachers are constantly walking around, lots of group work happening. There are a lot of field trips in elementary school versus secondary school because they require a lot of that concrete, something they can actually touch and experience, a lot of active learning during that time period, okay? But also during that time period, in terms of inductive reasoner, you can tell them anything you want to tell them and they'll believe it. They're not going to question. They might ask, can you give me an example so I can see it, right? So smoking is haram, okay, smoking is haram. Where have I seen that before? Well, cancer in the hospital. Oh, okay, yeah, I've seen the commercials. I've seen people dying. I get it, right? So they might need an example, but they'll, at face value, do everything we tell them to do. Read Quran, pray Salah, give zakah, sadaqah, concept of Hajj and so on. They accept it. But after the age of, let's say, grade 8, grade 9, they become a deductive reasoner. They have to now deduce for themselves why they believe in something. This is not different than you and I, because as adults, we go through exactly the same process. The difference between ourselves and our teenagers is years of experience. We already know that smoking is haram. We've already come to that conclusion 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, because we lived through it. We experienced it. We thought about it. And after the age of 19, 20, we decided, yes, this is haram, this is halal, right? But for kids and teenagers, that's still a growth process. And the biggest part of this deductive reasoner that they're trying to develop, it resides right behind the forehead. Does anybody know the part of the brain that's right behind the forehead? Frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is a logical, reasoning, problem-solving part of the brain. The deductive part of the brain is right behind the forehead. Right behind the forehead is the part of the brain that tells us and helps us teach and helps us learn what's right and what's wrong. What age does it fully develop at? Take a guess. 25. 25, no, you got it. It's exactly 25 years. It takes 25 years for that prefrontal cortex to fully develop. So when we're arguing with a 16-year-old kid, they have only 2/3 of a brain, right? So as a teacher or the principal in school, when kids do something silly, I understand that, okay, they're not doing this necessarily on purpose. Yes, some might do it on purpose. For the most part, they're doing it because they just don't get it. They haven't experienced enough life to know that you don't touch someone else in that manner. You don't swear at the teacher. There's consequences for it. After they've done maybe 2 or 3 times, they might start to understand that there are consequences. But the first time, a lot of times, it's experimentation. If I say this word at school, what's going to happen? What's the teacher going to do? And I've had this happen where a kid will actually come up to me a number of times where a student might be walking by and say a word to me and say, okay, now what is he going to do? Is he going to consequence me, or is he going to just walk by and make sure, pretend that didn't happen? Now, my job as a disciplinarian is to discipline, to teach them, right? And as parents as well, we want to do the same thing, to understand that kids are constantly pushing the envelope to figure out where does the line exist. That's what they're trying to figure out in that tug of war that happens during these years, where it really feels like we're speaking to an alien, right? So the fundamental part of understanding communication between with our kids is to understand where are they with regards to their development, their actual brain development. And that will help guide us in understanding why they're having temper tantrums, when is best to teach them, and when are we going to start having this tug of war with them. So when we are working with teenagers, it's so important to not tell them anything anymore. Lectures don't work. My father tried with me for many years. It just doesn't work. Lectures stop at the age of 12, 13. If we want teenagers to learn, they learn by answering questions, right? So as I mentioned, everything's experiential in the inductive reasoning or in elementary school. In secondary school, everything is through questioning, right? So if you've ever seen the report card or if you've ever seen a test for your child in high school, in Ontario, there are 4 categories. There's knowledge, which is basic recall, and then you have application of that knowledge. You have thinking, which is communication skills, right? And TACK, so there's communication, and so thinking, application, communication, knowledge. But they're all trying to cover critical learning skills, critical thinking skills. And it all happens through questioning. So in secondary settings, we're all questioning the students, giving them all these different types of questions to take them from the basic understanding to an applied level of understanding. Take this knowledge and now apply it to an abstract concept. And that's the difference between elementary and secondary. Elementary, they need everything in concrete. Again, they have to be able to experience it, touch it, feel it, see it, in order to believe it and understand what it means. In secondary, they can now understand an abstract concept. They can invent, right? They can theorize, right? Whereas before that, they couldn't. So when we're speaking with our teenagers and we want them to learn, rather than saying that smoking is haram, you ask them the question, is smoking haram? Is marijuana haram? Why would Allah tell us that the alcohol, al-khamr, and alcohol, like also what's intoxicants, are haram, if there's medicinal benefits to it? Ask them these questions. And when they start to answer these questions, that's where they start to build foundation. Why is a boyfriend-girlfriend haram? It's in the Quran. Why is it haram? Why would Allah tell us not to have a girlfriend, not to have a boyfriend? Why do I have to eat halal? Why do we not eat khanzir, like pig? Why? Ask them these questions so that when they're in the real world and we're not with them, and someone asks them that question, why are you a Muslim? Why do you study the Quran? They can answer, right? Because when they're young, we have to tell them, but when they're older, people in university, people in high school, teachers in high school will ask them, why do you people follow Sharia law? Right? There's tons of Islamophobia in the world. It happens in schools all the time. Why do Muslims have to cover their hair? Why do Muslims pray 5 times a day? John Fraser Secondary School, not too far from here, dealt with a situation where a teacher told Muslim kids, it's not practical to pray 5 times a day. You should be like Christians, pray 1 time a week. Right? So these kind of conversations happen. So we have to be able to communicate with our kids in a way that they can take it beyond us. Okay. When the biggest also, and so let's talk about barriers to communication. Barriers to communication exist with popular culture. Do we all understand what popular culture is? Okay, so I'm going to define what it means to us, okay? So this is popular culture. Our children are constantly being bombarded with so many different media, whether it's what they watch on TV, conversations they hear their parents having, conversations they hear teachers having at school, things they might listen to on the radio, especially if you're driving your kids to work and you're listening to 680 News on the way to work, or 1010 CFRB, and they're listening to these conversations happen. It's impacting them. What they see in written media, magazines, newspapers, on the internet, impacts them. What they see on YouTube, and what they see, of course, on Netflix, right? Or Prime, or Hulu, or whatever television that we have at home, all of this has an impact on them. What they watch on the news, what they see on athletics impacts them. The video games they play has an impact on them, right? You guys know this one? You should if you don't. Anybody know what this is? This is Discord. So Discord is the #1 tool that teenagers right now are using to communicate with each other. And it starts at grade 6. So about grade 6 and onwards, kids are using Discord to communicate with each other. It's a chat room system. But let you know, if you don't know what Discord is, it's banned in Peel. You cannot access Discord in any Peel school. There's a reason behind that. So if our kids are using Discord at home and it's banned in the school board, we might want to question why our kids are using it. Everybody know what this is? This is The Weeknd, right? Not The Weeknd that we're on. That's his actual name. He's a very popular singer and kids follow him. They follow him on his social media as well and whatever he puts out there. And TikTok, I think most of us are aware of what TikTok is. I'm going to ask you a few other questions. Who's Chadwick Boseman? What popular Marvel character does he play? The Black Panther, right? So if you're not aware who Chadwick Boseman is, because he died recently, but he had a massive impact. And our kids have been watching and following his story. and they're influenced by him. Does everybody know Avengers Infinity War? If you haven't watched it, you should watch it, because your kids have probably watched it, even when you're not looking, right? Everybody knows about the royal death, right? Queen Elizabeth died. Did that have an impact on our kids? Maybe, maybe not, but Harry and Meghan Markle have had an impact on our kids, right? Because they're younger in age. Kids are following them, watching them. Anybody know who Ye is? Kanye West, right? And he also wore a shirt that said White Lives Matter. That has an impact on kids, and all the crazy stuff he does on a regular basis as well. I think I've also known about Justin Bieber, Bieber Bits, or some kid, I'm not going to say it in Mushit, but there's other names people have for that. Everybody know who Harry Styles is? So Harry Styles is a musician. Kids follow him. They follow his antics. Most recently, I think 2 weeks ago, he got into a fight with some rapper and spat on him. It's a big thing in social media. Tom Holland, Spider-Man, right? Drake, I think everybody knows Drake or should know Drake. He's the ambassador for the city of Toronto, right? He's an ambassador for the Raptors as well. Ed Sheeran, he's a musician, right? So being aware of who our kids are listening to, what they're being exposed to. The most famous song he had about 3 years ago, it's called I Love the Shape of You, right? It's an impact on kids and their body image, right? So kids are being impacted. Taylor Swift, the top 10 songs in the Billboard Top 40 are her songs. So you don't have to listen to the songs, but listen to the lyrics, right? Because our kids are being exposed. Even if we don't have music in the home, our kids are going to school and they might be impacted by this, right? Zac Efron, High School Musical, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? He's a very famous actor. A lot of kids have followed him because he was in these High School Musical movies. In fact, High School Musical is a play that a lot of high schools will use across North America as a play that they do every year. And there are actual, some high schools have music clubs based on that musical. Right? So it has had heavy influence on society. Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, we all know about that because our kids know about that. I mentioned Fortnite, Call of Duty, Roblox. Does anybody have a Roblox account? So, first piece of homework tonight, if your kids are on Roblox, go get yourself an account, right? And follow your kids on Roblox. Play with them on Roblox, right? If they're doing any sort of video game, do it with them. Either in the same room or on the same screen or somewhere, be in touch with them through their video games. Elon Musk, I think we all know. Our kids are influenced by him. The death of Bob Saget. Anyone know who Bob Saget is? So he did the whole series, what's the show called? Full House. And also another, America's Funniest Videos. So that's all, that was back in January, had an impact. Stranger Things. Anybody watch that TV show?
Love it.
You love it? Mashallah. I couldn't watch it after season 2, but I watch it with my kids. So if you're not watching this, your kids might be watching it. Find out what they're watching and watch it with them. There's a show called Never Have I Ever, also on Netflix. 13 Reasons Why is 4th year or 5th year now running. Is one of the most popular shows on Netflix. And the premise of 13 Reasons Why is based on a book about 13 reasons why I should kill myself, why I should commit suicide. So we should be aware of what our kids are watching again. We all know Hulk Hogan, John Cena, The Rock. Who's the current WWE superstar? Roman Reigns. Right? So being aware of who these people are will impact us because our kids are being impacted by them. Do you know who Kyrie Irving is? Basketball player with the Brooklyn Nets. Right? Anybody know he's actually Muslim? Not sure everybody knows that. But most recently he did something online. Anybody know? Yes. What did he do? He shared a movie link, which is being deemed anti-Semitic, and after a week of argument, he finally put out a statement saying that he apologized for putting the statement out there. But our kids are being impacted by that, being impacted by how he's being treated in the media. I think we all know Keanu Reeves, Barack Obama, Lady Gaga. We should all know Lady Gaga. I think probably the whole world knows who she is. And Will Smith. We know who Will Smith is? Anybody know what happened recently with him? Yeah, he slapped Chris Rock. So our kids are impacted by that. The reason I'm bringing up these aspects of popular media is so that we understand that we're always in a competition with what's happening outside. So when we are communicating with kids, it is essential that we communicate with them through the media that they are being exposed to. What that means is watching TV shows with our children. Why should we watch TV shows with our children? What can we do if we're watching it with them? You can influence them. You can press pause. All TV can be paused, and you can say, what just happened? What was just said? How do you think about that as a teenager living in Canada in 2022? How do you think I feel as a parent listening to what just happened or watching what just happened? Right? Sometimes we watch TV shows and we don't always take time to recognize the impact. I'll give you an example. My younger child likes watching cop shows, right? So what's the NYPD, the one with Tom Selleck. We watch that one quite often. But most recently it's called Chicago PD. Chicago PD is full of people dying. Cops shooting people, white cops shooting black people. So we're pressing pause, so much so that she doesn't want to watch the show with me anymore. But the point is to keep pressing pause over and over and over again so that it settles in their head that something's wrong with what they're seeing, so they don't accept it as being something very normal. Now, why is that important to me? Is because I grew up in a generation of Die Hard. Everybody watched the movie Die Hard with Bruce Willis? How many people died in that movie? How much swearing was in that movie? How much blood and guts and gore was in that movie? And yet, Bruce Willis, who did all the killing, is the hero of the movie and revered. Right? And they made like 5 parts of that movie. Right? It's one of the most successful blockbuster films they've ever had. So that influenced me as a young teen growing up and seeing that and being impacted by that. Right? After that, gun sales went up.
So I have a question.
Yep.
It's coming to my mind. I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old and a newborn baby. All these things here, some of them, like in Netflix, I have right profile set up and I watch, but some of them, I've tried to have my kids stay away from pop culture based on their ages, right? Like the weekends, not appropriate for a 5 or 6-year-old.
No.
So the question really is, I see, because I work in the community as well, I see a lot of parents who completely camouflage and hide their kids from the world around them, pop culture. Whereas here, I think the narrative you're building is how to let them somewhat embrace it, but help them navigate and question it.
That's a good question. So when they're teenagers, we're not going to be able to stop them, right? They're going to be seeing these things, they're going to be exposed to it. Some of them will do it sneakily. Even if we hide internet at home, they'll go to school. They'll have internet access over there. They're talking with their kids, and kids want to feel like they belong. They want to feel like they're in the know. We didn't have music growing up, for my kids. It was not pop culture music, was something I kept outside the home. And our kids are homeschooled. So it shocked me when they went to a homeschooling event and they came back talking about Taylor Swift and about Justin Bieber and about all these other musicians. Now my kids didn't listen to the music, but they looked them up online, read their biographies so they could at least communicate with their friends, so they didn't feel like they were left out. So recognizing these type of things are going to happen, it's important that we think about these things before they happen. So when I saw that happen, I started looking at lyrics of these songs and teaching my children the lyrics of songs. Look at the lyrics before you listen to the music. Knowing that it's a tidal wave you can't stop, but you can mitigate how they access that tidal wave so they don't get swept away by it and drown, right? But when they're young, I started off when my kids were very young with the same mindset. I'm going to put them in a closet and bring them out when they're 25 years old, right? And nothing's going to touch them. But after some time, you realize that this is not practical. It's not real. So when they're young, very purposefully decide and choose what pop culture media they're going to be exposed to. So when my kids were about 5 years old, I introduced them to Blue's Clues. You can find it on Apple TV. You can buy the whole series of it. Anybody know what Blue's Clues is about? Right? Okay, so most of you know, which is great. I'm talking about the old ones, not the newer ones. The older ones were designed for kids. Mr. Dressup, right? That was for kids. Mr. Rogers is probably one of the best ones for kids, right? So take some time to really look at what's available today and what was available, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, because they're still accessible. And we can still use those earlier children's programming TV to actually help our kids grow and develop, because it allows for parents to be involved with that programming. But today, if you look at what they're being exposed to, there isn't any clear message of hope or resilience or goodness or honesty coming up from any of it. Even Thundercats. Anybody watch Thundercats when they were young? Right? So Thundercats, every time the show would reach a point of conflict, these main characters would put their hands together and they have a characteristic, right? Truth, loyalty, honesty, respect, right? Love, and they'd all talk about it. So then it just became part of the creed, right? That kids grew up with. But today, what do the kids watch? Simpsons is probably the only cartoon that comes on like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that kids can access. Pokemon, all the derivatives of Pokemon that kids watch are exposed to, has no message in it. So it's very important, come back to your point, to as a parent, study what is out there in social media and expose them to what is appropriate. Not all Muslim resources are appropriate. So even Adam's World, which has been around for a long, long time, not every single episode is going to be something which benefits. Not every single episode is going to be something which benefits our kids. Some of them can actually cause harm. There's something called the Big Comfy Couch, which seemed to be kind of a nice program we would watch, until one episode called The Hit Parade. And after that episode, my kids hit each other. That we don't have violence in our home, but that episode taught them about hitting and why it's bad, but they had to experiment. I'm going to hit you, you're going to hit me, we're going to cry, and then parents are going to get upset. Let's see what happens, right? So it's important to sometimes pre-watch what they're going to be exposed to. Even when it comes to books, if you're going to give your kids books, pre-read the books before you give it to them. Or give them books you know that have a positive message. So I grew up reading Gordon Corman, many of his books. Not all of them are good for kids, but some of them were decent, funny, has some good morals to them. I used to read this book by Beverly Cleary. She's an author as well. Last name Dunn, first name starts with an R. Richard Peck is another one. These are, and then even the Encyclopedia Brown series, the Nancy Drew series, the Hardy Boys series. These are all mystery novels, right? So these are all from before a time of modern novels. Most modern novels now have some sort of sexual content or some sort of relation to the LGBTQ, right? Which we might want to protect our young kids from, right? So pre-read, pre-watch, right? And don't put the news on. Because when radio is flowing, you don't know what's going to come out. You're not going to, you know that sexual assault happened over the weekend and blah, 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 blah. So-and-so was killed or murdered, and your kids are like 5 years old sitting in the back seat thinking, oh my God, what's happening in the world? It can really freak them out and create that anxiety. So don't listen to the news with kids because you can't pre-watch it, right? The beauty of living in today's society, you can pre-watch everything before the kids watch it, right? And even if you're sitting there if you're watching live TV, you can press pause on the TV. And why I was asking about why you want to watch TV shows with kids is because you can press pause and you can forward. You can forward scenes that have excessive violence or inappropriate language or inappropriate nudity, right? Everything is rated. There's a website you can go to called commonsensemedia.org, commonsensemedia.org, and you can, on that website, any book, video game, TV, movie, you type it in and it will tell you swearing, consumption of alcohol, nudity or sexuality. It gives you a whole rating system of what's in this thing you're about to embark on. And then you can decide whether you want to use it or not. My kids at this age will go to the app themselves. It's an app you can get, you'll watch it online as well. And then they'll decide on their own whether they're going to watch something or not. So if they want to watch a movie, I'll say, if you check Common Sense Media, they'll quickly go on it, they'll say, okay, we're not watching that movie, right? And we just move on to find something else to watch. So it becomes part of the culture of the home. Yep.
But it has so much to do with witchcrafting and all that. So as a Muslim, right, there's so much invested across the world, like billions of dollars, right? You go to Disney, you go to some of those Universal Studios, and they've spent almost like $1 billion just on that. You recognizing that you can't really completely get them out of it, and like the brother was alluding to, which is you can completely 100% shelter them. What are the tools as a parent that we can use to almost give them a certain set of guidance or meaning that they watch it, but at the same time, they don't take away what ought not to be taken as a Muslim?
Right. So there's a saying that Imam Siraj Wahaj has. He's in Brooklyn, and it always sticks with us, and we often say as a family is, take the best, leave the rest. Right? Take the best, leave the rest. And so in answer to your question, it's important for us that when we know we're about to engage in something which borders on the haram or is haram in our deen, to pre-teach it to our children. Right? So before we watch Harry Potter, and I'll share with you what we've done in our home, we talk about sihr, we talk about magic, we talk about black magic, we talk about white magic, we talk about ruqya, we talk about all exorcism in our deen. And I have taught this to my children. We taught about how to do ruqya before you go to bed. All the du'as going in the washroom, coming out of the washroom, the concept of the jinn, the concept of black magic itself, where does it originate from? So that when they do watch and they engage not just in Harry Potter, but there's elements of sihr in a lot of video games that they engage in. There's sihr in some of the cultures, like the Haitian culture is based in what religion? Voodoo. Voodoo is all black magic, right? 100% of it. So pre-teaching our kids as much as possible so they understand where it's coming from, so to dismantle it before they become exposed to it. So I'm glad you brought this up because it's important for us to start thinking as parents, what are the aspects that my children are going to be exposed to in life that I need to start teaching them and communicating with them as early as possible. So if I sit with my kids 5 minutes before we watch the first Harry Potter movie, it's going to go in one ear, out the other ear, because what are they doing? They're excited about watching Harry Potter. But if I have a conversation with them now today, and on Wednesday, and on Friday, and the next Sunday we're watching Harry Potter, right? I've already done the dismantling, disrupting in their minds about black magic before we watch it. Then when we watch it, we have to have some pre-questions. So if you go to that website, Common Sense Media, it says, ask these 5 questions before you watch this movie. After the movie is over, ask these 5 questions. That website originally was actually set up by Christians, by a Christian missionary, and now it became like a public service. And so it's very particular questions that you would ask before and after watching something. But even during the movie, so we end up watching movies twice, because the first time we watch it, it's teaching. The second time you can enjoy it, because we've done the teaching. That's how it's been happening in my household forever. So you always press pause to ask the kids the questions. Even when we're doing Blue's Clues, if you're familiar with Blue's Clues, they ask a question and they wait. They wait 30 to 45 seconds before they give the answer. So as a parent, I press pause, ask my kids the question, give them 5 minutes if they need to, because they're younger. And then when they come up with the answer, press play and let's see if they're right or wrong. Even when we're watching Jeopardy, right? Are you watching Wheel of Fortune? You can press pause and say, hey, what do you guys think? Right? Engage them in what they're watching, so they're not just watching blindly and not realizing that subconsciously they're being influenced somehow, that they're not always consciously aware of. Yes, sister?
Sorry, did you say there was a website that?
Yeah, commonsensemedia.org. The other one's called it's called Kids in Mind. I can't remember the website. If you just Google it, Kids in Mind, that's another one. But it's not as robust. But commonsensemedia.org has video games, books, movies, and TV. And I would say in the books category, it's not as robust, but the other ones it is, especially for the video games. It tells you everything. Especially for ourselves, it's always about nudity and they'll tell you if there's talk about LGBTQ in the TV show or movie that you're going to be watching. So you can choose whether you really want to watch it or not. Okay, I'm going to go on. Okay. So let's talk about where and when can we actually take time to communicate to our children so we can communicate to them our expectations as parents, expectations based on our deen, expectations based on our culture, expectations based on being Canadian, expectations of living in the year 2022, right? You and I, we grew up in a different time. We grew up when expectations were different for young ones. We grew up in a time where we were not exposed as much as our kids are now. A very simple question we always should ask ourselves, when were my children born? If my children were born after the year 2008, what were they born with? What happened in 2008? The smartphone came out, exactly. The smartphone came out in 2008. So if my child was born after 2008, they're being born into this world where everything revolves around the phone. If my child was born after the year 1995, which all our kids probably are born after, what happened in 1995? The internet, right? You and I were born before 1995. We were born before the internet, right? So it has a different impact on us, right? We were able to mitigate and learn it, not just be here, you're born and here you go. Here's a tool in your hand that can destroy you or it can make you better, right? So the question we have to ask ourselves is when we're talking about communication and we're talking about teaching our kids through communication, we have to actively look for opportunities to learn to teach. In this conversation we had about popular culture, we talked a lot about movies and TV. where it provides a means to stimulate conversation. But there are other ways that other times and places that we can look for to help us be conscious of having those conversations. So at home, right, while we're teaching our children responsibility, and we want them to become involved in the household and maintain the household, these are some ways that we can actually get them involved in the house and have conversations about why is this important, right? And one of the largest elements that kids don't understand when parents give them chores is not just about responsibility, it's about leadership. Leadership begins in the home. So when we ask questions to our children about why it's important to get involved in making sure the household runs and that everybody has a part to play in it, it means that we're all working together as a team. We're collaborating with one another. We're empowering them to have that independence and to be a part of the home, rather than I'm living in my parents' home, I can't wait to move out and have my own home, right? So even something as simple as choosing the color to paint the walls, which kind of car we're going to buy, which kind of TV we're going to buy, what pots and pans we're going to buy, right? What are we going to have, for dinner this week, right? All of those are elements that we can include our children in terms of having those conversations and building that teamwork and collaboration, and again, helping them feel that they belong in the home and that they have some leadership in the home, because when they speak, their voice is heard. Another element that's important here that we can teach our kids when they get involved in chores is accountability. Accountability to who? To Allah, right? So I'll share with you that what I share with my kids about when I'm trying to convince them about doing their chores to the best of their ability. We talk about one element in Deen. What's it called? When the Prophet told us when you do something, do it with ihsan, right? Do it with excellence. So if the kids are vacuuming, cleaning up, brooming, cleaning their room, do it with ihsan. During these times of conversation, trying to almost convince our kids about the importance of these responsibilities, it's important that we share our life stories, right? We share how we learned this, when did we learn it, how did their grandparents teach us the sense of responsibility, right? I oftentimes will share with my kids that when I was in grade 11, I had a job working at Simpsons. Everybody know Simpsons? It became Sears. Anyway, and then Sears is gone now as well. But I remember my manager of manufacturing, Harry Vaswani, and he's brown, South Asian, so we were vacuuming one time in the store, and this was my chore at the store, was vacuuming. We took turns doing it. I used to sell suits, so we also always keep the carpet clean. So I was a little bit, I'm 16 years old, why am I vacuuming? I don't vacuum at home, I'm vacuuming at work, so I'm like, he stops me, he says, hold on a second. Don't ever give these people a chance to say that you didn't do your job to the full extent. Who are these people? I'm asking, who do these people are? He's brown, I'm brown. Who are these people? Non-Muslims and white, right? He's teaching me that be careful. You live in a world where racism is very real. Don't give them an excuse to say that you did something wrong. Right? So I teach this to my children about the importance of ihsan in front of Allah. That accountability exceeds every other accountability, but people are always watching, right? And our actions or inactions has an impact, right? So if I don't broom properly, and then your sister walks along and gets cut on the bottom because a piece of glass was on the ground because I didn't vacuum properly, how's that going to make me feel?
We do communicate on and off, but how do we know that it's getting through to them? Because there's no response. Yeah. And how much is enough during the day?
Right. It's a good question. So let's go back to the brain. It takes 25 years for that problem-solving center of the brain to develop. 25 years to develop the brain. So kids don't always know how to communicate back, right? They don't always know how to communicate back. How do we know if it's getting through to them? We see action, we see change, but we have to remember that change and that action is incremental. Small steps. I'll give you an example as an adult. So right now in the Appeal Board, we are under ministry review because of anti-black racism, which has been prevalent in our board for almost 40 years. So in the last 3 years of doing professional development for my staff, how do I know that they're learning? Because no one tells me if it's going well or not, right? So, and the question is, do I see any change? So for the first 2 years, 2.5 years, I'll tell you I saw no change. No one was changing the lesson plans, no one's being aware of it. But this year, for the first time, a teacher goes, is talking with some students, and one student's being bossy towards the other students. He says to the student, "Wow, you're a real slave driver, aren't you?" Teacher immediately recognized what she had done, apologized to the kids, walks into my office and confesses. Because now we have an accountability tool that anytime something racism happens, we have to fill a report, it goes to the director's office, and then there may or may not be discipline. This is for students and for teachers and for principals for that matter. So sometimes accountability measures might make a difference, but it took 2.5 years before the staff finally woke up and started to listen to the language that they were speaking. And this is adults. These are people 40 years old. So now I have to ask myself the question, what do I expect from the kids? If it took 2.5 years for adults to start recognizing the language, then am I going to fault kids for that they still continue to use the N word and say the P word and the R word and the F word and all the other kind of different kind of words out there? Like, so I have my expectations have to be in measure with what I'm seeing around me with adults. But in terms of are our kids understanding, in those conversations, the key question to ask them is, am I making sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? And then one of the best ways, especially when the kids are, let's say, grade 6 and up, is give them a scenario. And I'll talk about it in a minute, but give them a scenario and say, if this happened, how would you react, right? So just exactly what I said. So my child is sweeping the floor. I see that they're doing not a good job. They maybe don't want to be doing sweeping right now. And I say to them after they're finished, if I walked over there right now and I stepped on a popcorn seed that wasn't broomed up and I hurt my foot really badly, how would that make you feel? Okay, it's going to make you feel bad. So what can you do to make sure that doesn't happen? And then a conversation continues about reminding about ihsan, accountability to Allah. I'm accountable to Allah just as much as my children are, right? We're all held to that higher standard. So this is I can come back to the question later on. I might cover it a bit later as well, inshallah. Okay. Another way of doing chores is actually doing things together. Because when we do things together with our kids, we can demonstrate to them and show them that how am I doing it, how are you doing it? We show them how to wash the dishes, how to vacuum, how to shovel the driveway, how to mow the lawn. And it's so important we not get involved in like what we call like genderism, where we say, okay, you're a girl, you can't shovel the lawn. Only a guy can shovel the lawn, shovel the driveway, or mow the lawn. Outdoor jobs are for men, indoor jobs are for women. This is gender bias. So if a child comes up to you, let's say for example you have a male child and he wants, so my brother says, well, he wants to vacuum the living room, and he's 6 years old now. It's actually 5 years old, and so is this acceptable? Is this appropriate? And so I'll say, of course it is. Why? You think a woman should only be the one vacuuming? What did the Prophet ﷺ do? Do you think he vacuumed? If he was around today, who would be vacuuming? Because he did what to his own clothing? He mended his own clothing. He cooked his own he cooked his own food. He took care of his own self. He took care of his own needs. He didn't rely upon his wife, right, to do all these household chores. He was part of those household chores. So what are we teaching our kids? Also, when it comes to cleaning the house together, we can take turns. Today I'll vacuum and you do the dishes. And tomorrow I'll do the dishes, you can vacuum, right? We spread the load around so we can all work together. And there's the expression, many hands make the work light, which is why we work together, right? Many hands make the work light. This is another, so in your homes, we all have a culture, right? We all have a culture in our homes. So what are some of the adages that we learn, that we use, or the phrases that we use in our home that kind of build a culture of our home? So that, this concept, many hands make the work light, if you do it long enough, then when your kids are old enough, they will say, oh, you're bringing in the groceries. I'm going to get up off from the TV, off from the video game, and go and help you bring the groceries in. Or you're cooking, well, let me come and give you a hand cooking. Or you're doing the dishes, let me come give you a hand doing the dishes. Or you're vacuuming, what can I do? Right? So it builds that sense that we all have to do something together to make the work light. And then we have something called teachable moments. I learned this a long time ago. I was in so I'm a high school teacher, but I was visiting an elementary classroom, kindergarten to grade 3. So in I think it was I want to say grade 1, or maybe it was a senior kindergarten classroom. One of the kids was painting, and he had some red paint inside of a baby jar, like baby food jar, and it fell on the ground and it broke. The glass broke, and the paint was all over the place. And the teacher, my instinct as an individual or a parent or whatever it might be, is that you kind of get angry. So, oh my God, it's built, now it's all over the carpet, it's all on the ground, there's glass everywhere, we're going to get hurt. This is not appropriate. Why couldn't you be like more responsible? But the kid's only like 5 or 6 years old. But this teacher had a system. She just gathered the kids around and say, look, the glass broke, there was no blame to the child. Glass broke, paint is there, who's going to do what? One kid went to get the janitor, one kid went to get the broom, one kid went and got this little sign that said caution, like a warning sign, it was like a red colored pylon thing, put it down. And all the other kids had a role to play when this incident occurred. And what she told us is this is what's called the teachable moment. And there are so many times in life where teachable moments happen because the glass and the paint can be replaced. You can teach kids how to clean it up. That's what you're trying to teach them. But if I sit there and start blaming the kid and getting on top of the kid's case, that kid is now going to be emotionally scarred. That kid may never want to paint ever again, right? So at home, if a glass breaks, I remember when I was younger, my kids, if I would break a glass, my parents would freak out, yell at me, scream at me, and then they would clean up the mess. But I remember one time, for whatever reason, a glass broke, and my parents came in and said, "Don't worry, let's clean it up together." I'll never forget it. Right? It was a green colored glass. I know because it was one of the, my parents had glasses for us and glasses for the guests. This was the guest glass that broke, so I thought I was going to be in a lot of trouble. Alhamdulillah, they came and they helped me sweep it up. I was a bit older at the time, maybe 11, 12 years old. I swept it up with my parents, threw in the garbage, and that was the end of it. And I felt better about myself, that I wasn't getting in trouble. So when these things happen in the home, we can use them as a teachable moment. Here's another example of a teachable moment. We have a big problem with winters in our country. So imagine that we're driving along and it's really wintry outside and we see people going through the snow, waiting in cold, snowy weather for the bus to come, and we're in this nice, warm, comfortable car. This might be a moment to teach our kids, hey, should we not be grateful that we're not out there freezing waiting for the bus to come? Can this be a moment of conversation to communicate to our kids about the concept of gratefulness? And maybe reflecting on Surah Ar-Rahman, which of Allah's favor would we then deny? Right? So becoming more aware of the things that we should be grateful for. Maybe we're going along and we see it says an accident or someone's pulled over to the side of the road. But we're not maybe in a position to stop and help them, but can we make dua for them? Can we make dua that Allah guides those people to Islam? Can we make dua that help comes for them quickly? Can we make dua that if I'm ever in that situation, that help comes for me quickly? Can I make dua that Allah protect me from being in that situation? So these are teachable moments when we see these things happening. Here's another one. We all do groceries, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. Have we ever considered involving our kids in designing the grocery list? Figuring out where we're going to shop, comparing prices, right? So I live in Brampton. We get the Brampton Guardian every Thursday. All these flyers are there. So we literally, now you don't have to do, you have this little app that helps you do it, but we would, for a long time, in fact, we still do this. We'll go through the flyers together and we'll look at where we're going to buy our tomatoes, bananas, eggs, milk, where's the cheapest prices. So it's a bit of an exercise that we do with our kids because I want them to also be smart consumers when they grow up. But it also invites the conversation is that what are we going to be cooking this week over the next 2 weeks? It makes it much easier for us as a family to figure out what groceries do we need and what are we making every day so that we're not wasting food. Right? We know when we're going to have leftovers for lunch the next day. Right? So this is another way, another opportunity to have conversations with our kids. And then using a Quran that actually makes sense for kids. Do everybody know who Mustafa Khattab is? He's the Imam at Anatolia, and he may have moved on from there, but he was there for a long time. So the clear Quran is written in plain, everyday English, and he has translated it by theme. So it's very easy for kids to follow along, and for adults to follow along as well. And he also has a version for young kids, right? So when we're coming to our deen and we want kids to understand, we should approach them from where they are. Right? So it's amazing, mashallah, we're living in a time where we're not just relying on the Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran, where it's thee and thou and wilts and Shakespearean language, right? That's the Quran I had when I was growing up. Didn't understand a word of it, right? But now we're living in a time where we have access to Qurans that make sense to our kids. There's a whole series of books by Taha Publishers, which is all about the different prophets. And it gives you small little 10 to 15 page synopsis of all of the prophets in the Quran. And they have a series of all the surahs in Juz Amma, a small tafsir, each of them 10 to 15 pages long. So that's another resource that it's all written in kid-friendly language. So the reason that I'm pointing this out is because it gives us an opportunity to engage in conversation with our kids. So we can buy multiple copies of these Qurans. They're not very expensive, $20, right? Everybody in the family has a copy of the same Quran, and we read the English translation together. right? Or we share I'm reading it myself. I see an ayah that is really cool the way it's being translated. It can be a conversation starter. I bring that to the dinner table and we have a conversation about it, right? Or when my kids are done finishing their homework, right? So many ways to communicate, many opportunities to communicate. And then there's something called pretend play. And pretend play is where we use scenarios, where we want to have a conversation with our kids about something. Maybe it's something we're seeing that they're not doing their homework, they're not getting the grades that they want, they're not helping out enough, they're talking back to their parents, they're not getting along with their siblings. We can bring up scenarios. Instead of always tackling things right when they happen, which might result in a power struggle and people getting upset, wait for a time, or proactively and preemptively, or even reactive, but wait for some time and then bring up a scenario. It doesn't have to be like the names of your children. It could be, Abdullah and Sumaya got into an argument about someone took their doll, or someone pushed them down, or someone didn't make their bed, or whatever it might be. These are ways to have those conversations by bringing it up, which is kind of a removed story that we give them, and then we go through that story and ask them questions about how they might react. Another type of scenario might be something that, if thinking forward, what if they get offered a cigarette? Or these days, if they get offered a vape, right? Like my school has one of the lowest suspension rates in our system, but our biggest problem right now is kids bringing vapes to school. Just on Wednesday, the vice principal walked around and collected 20 vapes left in washrooms, all boys' washrooms, right? Just in one day. So it's a big problem, this vaping thing, right? Let's say, for example, someone says to you, "Oh, let's go skip class." Yep. Vapes. Vaping. So vaping, it looks almost like a little lighter. That's what it looks like, and it's like a cigarette, but it's like a liquid. So it's the same size and shape as one of those old lighters, and you put a little liquid inside there, and then you smoke it. So it's like an electric cigarette, basically, right? And you can smoke marijuana, you can smoke tobacco, or you can just like shisha. You can just smoke like oils, like flavored oils, right? Yeah, drugs. So you can put cannabis inside there. Cannabis and tobacco. So cannabis is marijuana. So you can put marijuana. That's one of the ones we found actually on that day. We found when marijuana was on the label of it. There were 2 or 3 of them which were tobacco, and those were just flavors, right? What a lot of kids don't realize is that when we catch kids vaping, they do a research project on the ill impact that vaping has. Vaping, you're actually inhaling oil. And when oil goes into the lungs and goes onto your alveoli, so inside your lungs, there's something called alveoli. They look like grapes. And they open and they close. That's how you breathe. Oxygen and carbon dioxide. When oil gets on them, they get stuck. And you can't breathe very well anymore. And people have been dying. It's not very well, people don't market this because they want to sell the vapes. But people are dying, especially teens are dying from the vape, from the oil. Right? So when we do that with kids, not all of them, but it has had a positive impact on some kids moving away from it. So using these hypothetical thoughts, pointing out things that are obvious. Oftentimes, kids are not always as smart as we might think they are, meaning that they cannot just understand that something is implicit. So for example, if I'm sitting with a kid and say, well, if your alveoli get stuck and you can't breathe, what's going to happen? Some kids just sit there. They don't know. So I have to tell them, you're going to die. You have to be explicit with teenagers. Again, they're not adults yet. They're growing into adulthood. You and I understand that if the alveoli stops working, they're going to die. But teenagers don't always make that connection. That's why so many teenagers get involved in risky behavior. They don't make that connection because no one has said it explicitly. If you smoke cigarettes, you will get lung cancer and you will die a horrible death, a painful death. It has to be explicit. That's why if you look at cigarette packages that says you will develop lung cancer, you will have can affect your pregnancy. It's explicit language on the cigarette packages. They don't have that when they're selling marijuana. They're not telling you that you're going to have hallucinations and you're going to end up in the hospital, right? Anybody gone to Credit Valley Hospital recently? 95% of the kids who are the teenagers, the adults inside there, are all there because of hallucinations caused by smoking too much marijuana, right? When I used to teach at T.L. Kennedy Secondary School, so many kids were getting this certain version of marijuana that they were just having hallucinations after one session with this marijuana, right? And some of them have been affected for years. One kid, Yaqub, it has now been 6 years. He's still not normal. Right? So we have to have these conversations with the kids and make it more obvious to them. Right? Sometimes Siblings might be, yep.
What's the last word? Always.
Oh, always explain. Yeah, explain, sorry, so yeah. Never assume, always explain. Always give a fulsome explanation when we're talking with our kids, because when they're teenagers, they don't always know. So we're asking them questions. Okay, if someone asks you to skip class, what are you going to do? Why would you say yes? Why would you say no? How do you feel about the pressure? If you say yes, if you say no, what's going to happen? What will be the impact of that? Yesterday I was here giving a talk with some of the kids about mental health, and I gave the example that about skipping class. I shared with them that my friend Jeff Caton and I, Jeff Caton's also a principal, he's in TDSB in Toronto. We remained in touch over the years. And it was Friday before March break. I think it was our grade 10 year, grade 11 year. So a few of the guys wanted to go and skip class and go to the Eaton Center. High school I went to was in downtown Toronto. So they're encouraging us to go, we didn't go. We ended up going to Mr. Galloway's class for English. And the whole class was empty except for the two of us. But those 4 guys who went to Eaton Center, all 4 of them got arrested for shoplifting. And I remember Jeff saying, you know, if we had gone down there, we would have been in the same mess, right? So you give examples, you share stories, but you make it explicit. What could be the harm? What could be the harm? Maybe you're crossing the road and you get hit by a truck because you should have been in class, right? So these are, when we're doing pretend play, when we're bringing up these hypothetical scenarios, it's so important that we are being very explicit and actually explicitly teaching these things to them. You know, it could be even something as simple of, you know, sometimes as parents, we might get stressed out if we have company coming over. We got to cook, we got to clean, make sure the house looks nice before the company comes over. But we can talk about that stress with our kids. We can use our own personal examples that we're experiencing at work or at home or in our social relationships and bring those up as hypothetical scenarios. If your friend said this about you behind your back, what would you do, right? Examples from work. My father used to do this to me all the time, now I do it with my own kids. My father was the manager of in a factory, a manufacturing factory, and he would come home and say, you know, Basil did this today, or Cindy did that today. What should I do? And he's already dealt with it, but he's asking me, what should he do? And I would give him my response, and he was like, oh, that's interesting. Or sometimes he'd be like, that's wrong, and this is why it's wrong, and here's what I did, and this is why I did what I did. So I learned through my father how to manage people, how to lead people, how to communicate with people, right? I do the same thing with my kids. I come home and say, this happened at home, sorry, at school. What would you do if you were the principal of the school? And this is what happened. For example, this happened 2 weeks ago. I brought it home. Cap gun. 2 kids in grade 9 science class bring a cap gun to school, bought it from Dollarama down the street during lunch hour, bring it into the classroom. There's a supply teacher, and pop the gun off. And the supply teacher goes crazy, and the kids are like, oh my God, there's a gun in the classroom. Everybody losing their mind, right? The kids thought it was funny until they came to my office, and they weren't so funny. It wasn't so funny anymore. But I went home and I dealt with it how I would deal with it. But I went home and asked my kids about it. So this is what happened. I brought the cap gun home, showed it to them. So if you're the principal of the school and this is what happened, how would you deal with it? Right? Their response was very different than mine. Their response was not punitive at all. I'd talk to the kid, tell them why it's wrong, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, well, I suspended them for 2 days because I went right to the, because of course, a gun in the school falls under and my kids don't know this, but it falls under Section 310 of the Education Act. I don't have a choice. I had to suspend. The only thing I have a choice over is how long I suspend for.
And they sell this at dollar store.
Oh yeah, dollar store. So I went to Dollarama and I spoke with the manager there. Her 2 kids graduated from the Woodland School, and she agreed to take them off the shelf. But she couldn't say that the Dollarama itself would stop selling them. But she took those ones off the shelf at the store. So I took the one down and showed her what happened in class. So she said that she can't control what kids do. I said, I'm not asking you to control what kids do, but can you take them off the shelf? She said, yes, I'll take them off the shelf. And she did. Alhamdulillah. Now, the next manager comes and might put them back on the shelf, I don't know. But at least for the weekend, it's not there. Okay. Other forms of communication. So I'm sharing this with you. This is from my own house. So this is a mailbox we have in our house. So my kids made it. It opens up and this little feather there. The feather means that there's mail in the box. And when the feather is down, there's no mail in the box. And in the mail, we put notes for each other. And so this is a series of notes. I brought a few examples as well. We have a little clipboard. You can take them around and pass them around if you like to. There's different examples of notes that we give to each other, and they're all thank you notes, right? So it's an opportunity to teach kids the importance of saying thank you, the importance of showing gratitude towards each other, the importance of being grateful to Allah that we have a family that we can be thankful for. And it also teaches us as a family to look for ways that we can thank each other. Thank you for cleaning your room. Thank you for making dinner. Thank you for making my favorite meal. Thank you for helping me with the homework. You're just the best person I know in the whole world. Thank you for just being you. right? Thank you for looking out for me. Thank you for making sure I got up on time to go to school. Even those smallest, most minute things that they do, constantly saying thank you. It brings the family together, and it demonstrates the language of being grateful for each other. So when they go outside in the world, they can spread that attitude of sadaqah. So I can hear my own kids saying thank you to their grandparents, to their nephews, to their uncles and to their aunts, right? To their khalas and so on. So they can actually, in their mamus and whoever else, like they're saying thank you on a regular basis, because this helps bring people together and bridge and create those relationships that are so vital to how we live and conduct ourselves in society, right? One small thing I just want to mention, if this impacts your family, and I'm just going to mention it because I saw it there. MOSS. We call ourselves Moss family. My last name is not Moss, obviously, right? Omar Azia. But the reason we said Moss is because in our deen, right, for those who follow this teaching, is that women don't change their last name, right? Our lineage is based on the patriarchy, so women hold on to their last name, their maiden name, so to speak. They don't change that name. So in our family, so because my wife has a different last name than Zia, my kids felt that she was excluded from the family. She's not a Zia. So we took the first initials of our name and made the word Moss. So we're the Moss family. This is something I wanted to share with you that comes from kids. When you open up the doors for communication, then you empower them by accepting what they're saying and using it. And this is something else I want to share that we have in our family. And this is something we do. We call it the Sunday night hoedown. And we did it more often when my kids were younger and less so as they get older. Now we just have regular conversations. So we would sit around on Sunday and we take the soccer ball and we pass it to each other. And when you catch it, you look where your thumb lands. And wherever your thumb lands, there is a question. And you answer the question. Who would like to go first? Ready? Ready to catch? Okay, so read the question out loud.
Something that makes me sad or mad.
Okay, something that makes you sad or mad. So answer the question.
If my daughter wakes up too late for breakfast.
Okay, for breakfast, there you go. And that might have a conversation. So now, daughter, how can I help you get up on time? Or should we have breakfast a bit later on the weekends? Or so now you can have a conversation about changing that routine, right? Because now you've explicitly said to your daughter how it makes you feel, right? Pass to somebody else.
I got the same question.
Okay,
Something that makes me sad or mad.
so why don't you change it? Get another question.
Something new or different our family could try. It would be nice to try some ice skating.
Wow, mashallah, there you go, good. And that's a conversation you can now have as a family. Excellent. Pass to somebody else.
Something new or I got the same one.
Okay, so pick another one.
What I like most about our family, praying Maghrib together.
Mashallah, good. So and when you do that, you're reinforcing something good that the family does together. And it pass to somebody else. Your brother, face, you can pass it. Okay, here you go.
Grateful for.
Something I am grateful for.
Yeah. So we initiate the discussion and ask the question to everybody. And
You can, or you're actually supposed to answer the question yourself.
oh yeah, something I'm forever grateful for being with the family and having good time with everybody, talking to each other.
Perfect. That's great. That reinforces positive behavior in the room. Inshallah. We'll go with one more person who wants to try it. Brother, if you'll pass it around.
The best book I have ever read. I read a fiqh book. My kids know I went through a course with that and I love it. So we always talk about that. I tell them often.
Excellent. So names of books is a great way to even instill literature, love for literature, and especially if you've done it through a course, your kids might want to read the same book as well, right? So jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much. So this is an example of ways to actually build that communication, to bring out the communication in the home. It's creating opportunities for ourselves to have those moments of communication. Okay. So as we mentioned, communication is the key. And we talked a little bit more, giving some examples about how we can do that, different ways, different moments, creating those opportunities to do so. But now I'm going to go through a series of videos. Okay, I'm just going to mention this. The women in the videos are relatively normally clothed, but they do not wear hijab. Obviously, there are a lot of non-Muslims, so hope everybody's okay with that, because we're inside a musalla, so I just want to say that up front. They're from what you would find on YouTube and type of videos like that. Okay, all right. And you'll see me in a couple of videos as well. So we're going to go through a few of them, inshallah, and we can talk a little bit about what each of them represents. So these are what we're going to be looking at. It's different ways that communication happens, and that we can make communication happen a little bit better. So the first one's going to be on active listening. Okay, that's the wrong way to do things, right? Here's some advice on the right way to do things. Okay. So to summarize, active listening is something I'm sure we've all come across or heard in some form or another. But it's something that in practice, it's not always something that we do. So what I'm encouraging all of us to do is to be conscious of active listening when it comes to communicating with our kids. Because our kids know when we're not listening to them. And especially with my older one who's 16 now, she will tell me, I know you're not listening to me. Especially if I'm sitting with my phone or watching TV or I've got my laptop open or if I'm reading a book as she's talking to me. If I don't put everything down and look at her directly, she knows I'm not listening. And she'll walk away. And then I feel like a horrible human being. So we're going to make these mistakes, but the more conscious we are, the better off we are in terms of being opening those doors to communication. Because if that happens one too many times, then we're not going to be able to, our kids will not want to communicate with us, the communication will not be as effective. The other part of it is also interrupting. So that first clip was like pretending to listen but not listening. Sometimes as we're listening to conversations or someone telling us something, as a human being, just as a default position of being a human being, we're already formulating a response, right? We haven't even listened to the entire way, and we're already formulating a response. This is what they call new world thinking. But the old world, which is where most of us come from, like not Europe or North America, the old world thinking, in fact, even when it comes to indigenous ways of knowing and being here in North America, we always are, what we would normally do is be silent. Let the person speak, and then ask for clarification. Summarize what they have said to us. Seek, have I actually understood what you're trying to tell me before I think about how to give a response. Does that make sense? Right? It's so important for us to try to cultivate that within our own selves so we can teach it to our own kids. So that when we are trying to teach something to them or share something with them, they're not already thinking, but you don't know, but you don't hear, you weren't there, and blah, 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 and then they're already defensive. But if we start teaching them how to summarize, then they will also start reciprocating that. And one way of doing that is inviting it. So after I've spoken with my child, I might say to them, what do you think I just said? Does it make sense to you? Right? And does it make sense what I'm sharing with you right now? What part of what I said do you not understand? What part of what I said does not make any sense to you? Ask them to summarize and seek clarification. By asking those questions, we're teaching them to do exactly that when we're talking to each other and sharing information with each other. Does that make sense? Right? So I just did it right there, right? I'm looking for nods in the audience. But part of active listening also means not judging, right? And this is, I'll just share with you. My mom's not here, but one of the conversations or problems I have with my mother is every time I would have a conversation with her, she'd be very quick to judge, very quick to judge. And it became to the point where I didn't want to speak with her because as soon as I opened my mouth, I knew that she's already thinking about what she's going to say to me, right? So it causes a breakdown in communication, right? It causes a breakdown in communication. So as young as they are, as old as they are, being patient to listen to them. In education and teaching, like if you're at the teacher's college, they teach you, it's called sitting on your hands. The actual tool is sitting on your hands, meaning don't say a word. Especially when kids are young and they're struggling to communicate, give it time for the words to come out. Right? Give it time for them to actually say something because it takes a lot of effort when they're younger to be able to search for the right words, to be able to communicate what they're trying to say in a relatively decent manner. So be patient with them. And even when we ask them questions, give them time to answer. Don't answer it for them. Let them think on their own. That's how we empower our kids and show them that we care about what they think. And we want them to think the way that they're going to think rather than you have to think the way I think. Right? One of the worst experiences that kids face in school is from their math teachers. Why? What happens in math class that's so disruptive to the child's communication? So oftentimes in math, we're told to do a problem. Let's say long division. And our kids are taught to do, you have to do it, whose way? The teacher's way. And if it's not done the teacher's way, you get 0 on the test, even if you got the right answer. If you do your own way, it's not correct. You have to do the way teacher taught it to you. And that's why kids don't like math. Generally speaking, most kids who want to be able to do math on their own, using their own brain, coming with their own solutions, have a problem with math. They struggle with it. There's a resource called The Life of Fred. If you want to look it up, Life of Fred. It's a clever way of teaching kids how to do math on their own, but also to be able to follow the rules the teacher gives them. It's done in a literature way. The Life of Fred. Okay.
F-R-E-D?
Yeah, Fred. Okay, I can't remember his name, but that person has the Guinness World Book of Records being able to speak the fastest in the world, right? But did anybody understand anything he said? Right, nothing at all, right? So the reason we're bringing this up is because our children, and human beings in general, there's actually a speed at which we speak and a speed at which we can understand, right? So sometimes when we're trying to communicate with our kids and they don't understand anything that's being spoken to them, is oftentimes, well, two reasons. Number one, vocabulary. Sometimes they don't have the vocabulary to understand what we're saying to them. Number two is the speed at which we speak. So as a teacher in the classroom, sometimes I will be teaching something, and I'll ask the kids, did you understand that? And half the kids will say no. And I'll say, why? And they'll say, can you slow down? Right? Can you slow down? Because they could not receive the language at the speed at which I was speaking. And myself, I have a problem. I speak really quickly, if you haven't noticed already. So let's learn a bit more about that. Okay, this one show will play.
Talking to your child can be frustrating, especially when it seems they don't want to listen. Local researchers says the problem isn't what you're saying, but how you say it. Eyewitness reporter Matt Wallace explains in tonight's Fox Focus.
Whether at school, raise your hand, or at home, the kids can be, well,
Tony Campus first few months because a baby crying out of attention.
as 7 toddlers run around. Dawn Ivy is one daycare provider with her hands full.
Sometimes it seems like you have to be in the TV just to get your child to listen. But one researcher says things can change, actually improve, if you just slow down your speech.
Audiologist Dr. Raymond Cole says most adults speak at 180 words per minute when they should speak at 120. Children can often miss important lessons. Communication starts with investing your time. Learn from the best examples. So to avoid the repeats, remember, slow down, save frustration for you and your child in Wichita and Arnoldan.
So what we're trying to say, if you want to pick it up, is that adults speak at 180 words a minute, but kids hear at 120 words a minute. And the example they gave there was video games, because video games, through their graphics and through the noises and so on, have slowed down to the point where kids can become mesmerized by it. And that's why it's so hard for them to pull away. A lot of TV shows, I mentioned Blue's Clues a number of times because the language is spoken very, very slowly. And the master of it was Mr. Rogers, who spoke at 124 words. He physically, he cognitively did that, 124 words a minute, and that's why kids are so mesmerized by his speech, right? So speaking slowly itself can be hypnotic. It could be mesmerizing for all of us. It also it makes it easier for us to digest words when they're spoken more slowly, right? So being cognizant of how fast we're speaking to our kids, even, I wrote down here, so even our late 20s, that's when we start to get about 180 words a minute. So even when we're speaking to teenagers, they might be only receiving maybe half or 2/3 of what we're saying to them, just because being adults, we're speaking at a faster rate than they can receive. So again, we're speaking 180 words a minute, even for a teenager, and they're receiving maybe 150 or 140 words per minute. And for younger ones, it's even less than that. That's 120 words for young kids.
So what about the language barrier? So if you're talking in one language, they're
even with different languages, it's actually the way the auditory part of our brain receives language. So even with different languages, it's important to slow it down. So I'll give you an example of myself. So I Punjabi. So I am Punjabi, that's our family background. My parents spoke it when I was very young and till today. So I can understand it, but I never learned to speak it. I cannot speak a word of Punjabi, although I can understand 100% of it. Why? Because I cannot replicate, in my auditory part of my brain, I cannot replicate 180 words output. So I can understand it, but I cannot speak it. Whereas with Urdu, for whatever reason, my parents spoke it very, very slowly, probably because my parents both think that Urdu is a very poetic language. So I can speak it a lot. I don't speak it very well, but I can still speak it because it was received at a slower rate of speed, right? So regardless of the language. Now, some languages, generally speaking, are spoken very fast. So the first language I spoke was Italian. When I grew up, the person who was taking care of me when I was younger, my grandmother, was Italian. And so she spoke it, and Italian is a very, very fast-paced language. But I learned somehow to speak that language at exactly the same speed as I was receiving it. So whether it's a specific Italian, I don't know. But it's...
If we are communicating something important, we tend to go and communicate in English, when we really want them to. And then generally, we are just communicating. Does that make a difference?
They won't. I think most parents do that. It's the same thing when you're like driving along and you're looking for a house and you turn the radio down. Like the brain has to focus, right? So I think that's a really smart idea, is that change the language, it changes the auditory receptor in the brain. All of a sudden, okay, pay attention, she's speaking English. She never speaks in English, this must be important. Just like a student in a classroom, it's on the board, okay, this has to be important. Everybody stop talking, I gotta write this down, because it's on the board. So it's good, it creates that, it's almost like a Pavlov's dog's like experiment where something happens and then people recognize that something, it's like when you write something in bold or in capital letters, people are more likely to pay attention. Okay, so that's the speed of talk. And now we're gonna talk a little bit about logic and imaginative play. So this actually is about questioning and listening. So this is about questioning and listening to kids, and that was the wrong way to do it. So she lost her phone for the third time, and I lost my cool. Right? So it's about body language. I didn't look at her. I kept looking at what I was doing on my iPad. I was very judgmental. I didn't take time to listen to what she had gone through. Here's the better way to do it. Okay. I'm not sure if you're able to hear that very well, unfortunately. The sound is very, very low. But basically what I said to her is that, so this time when she came, I put my iPad down. And she says to me, I lost my headphones again. So I said to her, okay, I understand you lost your headphones, okay. So when was the last time you saw them? Right? And, so before that, I said, that must be very frustrating. I kind of validated her emotions, right? It must be very frustrating. How many times has it happened now? 3 times. Well, if I were in your shoes, I would be very frustrated. But I might ask myself, how can I make this better? And then she says, well, I could probably put them in the same place every time I take them off after I finish using them, so I remember where they are. And that's a great idea. Where do you think they are right now? Where was the last time you saw them? And she said, well, maybe in my bedroom. So I said, well, if you check over there and find them, and if not, we'll get you a new pair, and we'll help you find a place to put them so you always know where they are. And then a high five at the end. Right? So it's about giving them the full attention, active listening, not being judgmental, validating the feelings, listening to what they're saying, and looking for a solutions-based approach to the problem. Right? That makes sense? Yeah. So this is more about logic and imaginative play. Okay, so she speaks very slow, very softly. So she's frustrated because there's no Nutella in the jar. I just said, well, tough luck. That's what life is like, right? So here's the better way to handle it. So once again, it's active listening, putting my device down to listen to her. And this time, using imaginative play. So when kids are younger, before the age of teenage years, you can actually respond to them through imaginative play. Rather than getting upset with them, you hear that they're frustrated. So ask the question, what if? What if the whole world was made of Nutella? Wouldn't that be amazing? What if our phones were made of Nutella? Wouldn't that be really cool? You can eat Nutella wherever you want. But that's not reality. So what can we do instead? Okay, I'll take the peanut butter. Okay, great. We'll get Nutella next time at the grocery store. So it's a way of breaking down the frustrations, a way of disrupting any negative feelings, and opening the door for imaginative play. Right? So when kids are very young, and I got this example specifically from the Big Comfy Couch, that little show that they used to watch. So it's something that they should use quite often in that show, imaginative play. Okay. So I can give you another example. So you get the idea, right? So cell phones at the table is always a big problem, right? People have this rule, no cell phones at the table. We want to be able to communicate as a family and not keep this as part of our lives. But at the same time, cell phones can be used as a communication tool, right? So this is giving an example from my own family here, right? So we have a little chat going, right? I remember me, you birthed me. Oh, that's wonderful memories. I cut the cord. How are you doing today? I'm good. How are you? Miss you, funny bunny. Miss you too, and I love you, right? So it can be used as a communication tool to have these interesting conversations. But sometimes kids want to express themselves, but they don't know how. And one of the benefits of texting is that you can erase it 100 times before you send it to make sure that what you're sending is exactly the communication you want to send. So it's a more safer way to communicate, because sometimes we're talking and the wrong thing can come out, especially when you're a teenager. So here's an example, right? When one of my children is going through a bit of a difficult time, right? And wants to somewhat apologize about what had happened. Right? And then she also tells me that I don't like when you get mad, which is important feedback for me to hear that, because then I can have a conversation about what she said here. And sometimes we text back and forth. It's a way to build a communication. When my kids were younger, before we had cell phones in the home, we used to have a regular telephone, and we had 2 lines in the home, so they would call me on my cell phone, and I was Omar the Owl. I was not Abi. I was not their father. I was Omar the Owl. So we called Omar the Owl for advice. My dad's a meanie. My mom hates my guts. How can I fix this? Right? And this was a way that that she was able to communicate with me when she was very young, before we got the phone. So it's creating safer ways for kids to communicate. Right? And then, of course, there are funny things that can also happen. So if you're not quick enough, strange things may happen. So after that, she had a giant bald spot in her head for a few weeks. Right? So sometimes you have to be a little quicker. 5 minutes, yeah. Just last one here now. Okay, so texting is the tool. And this is the last one I want to mention here. This is so for you can't really hear this one. Put my mic on the computer. If I put my mic on the computer, would that help?
Explain it to them.
Yeah. Let me just try something. This doesn't help. So I'll try to explain as they're going through the slides, but maybe so let them choose their own career path so that they have some choice as they go through that part of life. Get that. The second one is about fitting in and social pressures. And from what I recall, what was said in the video is that there's a lot of pressures that kids go through in society as they're trying to fit in and find their place in society. So it's important to allow them to grow into that, allow them to choose which way they want to conduct themselves in society, but to be there for them while they're dealing with those pressures. So because things are changing, teenagers need some help to help them figure out how, what they want to be, who they want to be through those difficult moments in time. And then letting them choose their own career path is about giving them options rather than telling them that you must be this or you must be that or you must follow my shoes, etc., and not living through the shoes of our kids vicariously, thinking, I wish I was a doctor, my kid's going to be a doctor, right? So it's about allowing them that choice and providing them as many opportunities to explore different pathways. So because parents have been there before, they should give advice on friendship, social situations post-secondary, because as adults we lived through that before. So teenagers are having sad moments because oftentimes they're trying to fit into what society asks them to be like. They're not able to fit that mold and feel that sense of inclusion. So as parents, what we can do is to reach out to our kids and make them feel that they belong in the home environment to begin with, and that's the most important environment for them to have that sense of belonging. I heard the end part. But yeah, so basically it was about, the last part was about just being there for kids, hanging out with them, going shopping with them, inviting them to go grocery shopping with them as well, and just letting them be part of the whole life itself. So in summary, what we talked about today is listening first. Listening for meaning, showing love and compassion, acknowledging their point of view for our kids, not using threats in our language, remembering their age when speaking to them, role modeling respect, responding with hope and enthusiasm, no name calling or not being judgmental, giving them space and time to grow, giving it time, measuring our words, what's our family philosophy, and what makes a good teacher. Just one last point as we wrap up here in the last minute about family philosophy that didn't really come out of the conversation is that sometimes when it comes to teaching our kids, it's about developing that family culture. I mentioned family culture earlier, but developing that family culture around certain principles or belief systems. Oftentimes we can use Islam as that belief system or as a central family philosophy, but I'll share with you the 3 rules in my own home that we have had since the kids were born. So the first rule is family first always. That means that it encourages teamwork and allows us to collaborate with each other. The second is that you can do whatever you want so long as you're not hurting somebody else and not harming yourself, which means you can't waste food, that's harming yourself. You can't not eat, that's harming yourself. You can't beat up your sibling, that's harming somebody else. You can't not do your homework because you're harming yourself. So this is like one rule that covers everything. Right? You can do anything you want except if you're harming yourself or harming somebody else. And the last is whatever happens in the home stays in the home. Because we don't want to, especially when the kids are younger, they like to go to the grandparents and tell them about all the things that happen in the home, all the arguments and mom and dad were yelling and screaming at each other, et cetera, right? So what happens in the home stays in the home. So it's an example of developing a family philosophy or a family culture around how we communicate and what governs communication in the home. Okay, and that becomes us to the end. Brother wants to give the adhan. So Jazakallah khair. I'm still around for any Q&A after we can do, inshallah, after
so
Salah.
after the azan, any Q&A with the brother, Umar Zia, you guys can do, inshallah, okay? Let's the azan finish first. Assalamu alaikum.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
استووا استقيموا الله أكبر الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر Allahu Akbar. Sami Allahu liman hamida. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Sami Allahu liman hamida. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Sami Allahu liman hamida. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.